Thank you, Gail, for arranging this event. Thank you to the audience for coming. I'm grateful to the Haramati family in Silver Spring for initiating this lecture series. I had the privilege of being a student of Mrs. Haramati at the Yeshiva Flatbush High School in the mid to late 1980s. My hope today is to share with you some of my experience and her impact on her students. It is very fitting to reminisce about her on the eve of Yom HaAtzmaut. Mrs. and Rabbi Haramati arrived at the Yeshiva Flatbush in the 1960s, and until their retirement in 2001, they were the bedrock of the Yeshiva Flatbush experience. They were legendary. Except she wasn't Mrs. Haramati, she was Geveret Haramati. You never spoke English in her presence, not ever. Not in class, not out of class, not decades later, even if she was at your Shabbat table. Geveret Haramati's mission was to teach Ivrit B'Ivrit, the language, the literature, and through that to teach Ahavat Yisrael. She was passionate about Hebrew literature, Tanakh, Hebrew language, Hebrew culture, and Medinat Yisrael. She was an extraordinary educator. She taught for over 40 years. Flatbush had over 200 students a year, so she and Rabbi Haramati taught and influenced thousands of students over the course of their career. A little on her background, Geveret Haramati was born in 1929 in Geula in Yerushalayim. Her father was Rav Shmuel Eliezri, better known as Eliezri. He came from Russia, where he was the chavrusa of the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim traveled extensively, and Rav Eliezri traveled with him, eventually reaching Vilna, where Rav Eliezri received a visa to go to Eretz Yisrael. There, he was recognized by Rav Kook as an outstanding student. Together, they prepared lectures for students in Rav Kook's yeshiva. Rav Eliezri and his family both moved to a new neighborhood of Bayit Vagan, where he became the rabbi there for both Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. He was also a teacher. Rav Eliezri volunteered for the Haganah in 1948 and was the first rabbi of the Israeli army. He was the rabbi of the army before Rav Goren, but because Rav Eliezri wanted to stay in Yerushalayim and did not want to travel extensively around the country for rabbinical duties, he stepped down and Rav Goren became the rabbi of Tzahal. Geveret Haramati was a seventh generation Israeli on her mother's side. At some point in the early 1800s, a formidable female ancestor of hers wanted to be buried in Eretz Yisrael, so her son moved with her there. Geveret Haramati's maternal grandfather, Yisrael Zev Halevi Horowitz, wrote the Encyclopedia Geographie Historique Shel Eretz Yisrael V'Shchenotea. Geveret Haramati grew up in a Dati Tzioni home. She was an active member of the youth movement Ezra, a more religious variant of Bnei Akiva. Nechama Leibowitz was a mentor of hers. Geveret Haramati well recalled her first Yom HaAtzmaut. She was one of the few families in Bayit Vagan with a radio. Ben-Gurion delivered his announcement declaring the establishment of the State of Israel late on Friday. The entire neighborhood of Bayit Vagan came to her home to hear the announcements, and her father turned off the radio when Shabbat began. On Shabbat day, realizing the danger approaching, her father took the entire community straight from Beit Knesset to prepare for the Arab assault. Her father was a good friend of Rav Herzog and Rav Frank, and did this with halachic authority. His philosophy was, Kol davar l'man haaretz, kol davar l'man ha'am. Do whatever is necessary for the land and for the nation. A little of my experience. You came to Geveret Haramati's class, room 202, on time. For Ivrit or Navi, handed in your homework, took out your loose leaf, and started copying down from the chalkboard the Ta'arich, date of the week, Parshat HaShavua, and the Pitgam Hayom. A Pitgam is an aphorism or ethical teaching. By the end of the academic year, you had 150 Pitgamim in your notes, and you committed all of them to memory for the final. If you were in a Sifrut class, you absorbed centuries of Jewish literature. We learned piyutim from the golden age of Spain, Shmuel HaNagid, Shlomo ibn Gvirol, Moshe ibn Ezra, and of course, Yehuda HaLevi, author of the beloved poem Libi Bamizrach V'Anochi B'Sof Ma'arav. I'll share just 4 lines because it really is a beautiful poem. Libi Bamizrach V'Anochi B'Sof Ma'arav. Ech et ama et asher ochal ve'ech ye'erav. Yakel be'enai azov kol tuv sfarad. Kamo yakar be'enai ra'ot afrot divir necharav. My heart is in the east and I am in the west. How can I enjoy my food in this state? It would be easy for me to give up all the luxuries of Spain because it would be so valuable for me just to touch the ashes of the remnants of the Beit HaMikdash. We read in Hebrew the short stories of Yud Lamed Peretz, Shalom Aleichem, Aaron Meged, Agnon, and more. We were responsible for understanding all the literary references in Agnon's stories, as that is part of what makes them magical. We read poems by Shaul Chernichovsky, Natan Alterman, and Rachel. We were steeped in themes of love for Am Yisrael, centuries-old yearning for Eretz Yisrael, and the breadth of Jewish thought and creativity over the centuries. You understood the centrality of Medinat Yisrael for Am Yisrael, and we're so proud to be part of that Jewish history. Recall, this was the 80s, and when you walked into Barnes & Noble and went to the Jewish history section, most of the books there were about the Holocaust, making it seem as if that were the essence of Jewish history. But as a Flatbush student, you knew firsthand that there was so much more. Here we were, Jewish students, reading Hebrew literature, talking in the Hebrew language, learning Tanakh in Hebrew. How better to respond to the Holocaust? I believe that was her and Rabbi Haramati's mission, to rebuild Am Yisrael through education, be an educated member of Am Yisrael, and do all you can do to defend Medinat Yisrael, because it is central to our existence. Together, Geveret and Rabbi Haramati instilled this ethic in generations of students, all the while being role models to students for what it meant to be a devoted, caring couple. I also had the privilege of learning Yeshayahu with Geveret Haramati. She loved Sefer Yeshayahu. I suspect there are 2 main reasons. One are its literary elements. Yeshayahu is a mixture of poetry and prose, and quite beautiful, if structurally complicated. For example, we learned about Tikbolet. The following pasuk has 12 words, which could be divided into 2 sections of 6 words each, or 4 sections of 3 words each. Yada shor konehu, chamor evus be'alav, Yisrael lo yada, ami lo hitbonen, and much more. The second reason I believe she loved Sefer Yeshayahu was that the themes of the Sefer spoke to her. Land of Israel, kingdom of Israel, leadership of Israel, Israel's relationships to her neighbors, ethical behavior, avoiding hypocrisy. So in light of the Pitgamim she used to teach us, I will close out by choosing 3 to highlight some of her teachings. First, Eretz Yisrael mikudeshet mikol ha'aratzot. The land of Israel is holier than all other lands. If you were a student at the Yeshiva of Flatbush, you held this truth to be self-evident. Many of my classmates made Aliyah out of high school, and we were all encouraged to spend a gap year in Israel. Second, Gadol ha'oset tzedakah mikol ha'korbanot. Greater is one who gives tzedakah than giving all of the sacrifices. Behaving with morals is the most essential and core principle of our tradition. As we read today in the Parsha, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Geveret Haramati taught us to love and live together in a unified Jewish society. We live in a time of great political division, a situation which would have been an anathema for her growing up in Yerushalayim, working with everyone then to defend and build the country. She would often recall that despite their hardships at that time, there was no complaining, there was no infighting, and there was tremendous idealism and unity. Finally, Istere bulagina kish kish karye. A small coin in an empty barrel makes a kish kish noise, it rattles loudly, whereas a coin in a barrel full of coins is not heard. This pitgam is a physical manifestation of a philosophical truth. Geveret Haramati was not about being showy, making noise for 1 or 2 things to impress others. She constantly worked for her purpose, to teach as many students as she could, as much as she could. Everything she did was not for fanfare or self-promotion, but for Am Yisrael and the development of the next generation of educated Jews. She never stopped teaching, even after her retirement. I don't know how, but everyone learned in her class, despite it being only in Hebrew. We often see today great efforts to accommodate students who have difficulties with different subjects, especially languages. But everyone in Flatbush spoke in Hebrew in all Judaic classes. All levels of students were elevated and lifted by her teaching to be able to study and appreciate our Masorah in Hebrew. She and Rabbi Haramati saw this as the right of every Jew to access our tradition in its native language of Hebrew. Geveret Haramati lived through the establishment of the State of Israel and the reawakening of our Jewish independence on all levels. I am extremely grateful for the tools and worldview she imparted to me during my years at Flatbush. Yehi zichronah baruch.
Thank you, Deena. Before we close, can you introduce yourself to the family? Just tell us who you are and what you do.
Hi, I am Deena Berkowitz. I'm a proud neighbor of Adi Haramati and Claire Haramati. I am a Kent Mill member. As you know, I was a student at Flatbush. I am currently a pediatric emergency medicine physician and associate chief at Children's National Medical Center in DC, where I also lead an acute care fellowship and am still clinical.
Thank you so much.